Well, I wonder if any of you guys have ever had recurring dreams. Different season of my life, I've been like prone just a couple times to recurring dreams. Like essentially, I'd have the same dream over and over and over. And when I was a kid, it was actually more of a nightmare, and it was exactly the same every time. And I must have dreamed it like dozens of times. I would be walking at night on the top deck of a very large ship, and I'd be looking over the rail at the ocean, and then somehow I'd fall over. And I don't know if you've ever dreamed, like in your dreams, you're falling in your dream, and it feels so real. Do you know what I'm talking about? So the sensation is just so real, and I'd be falling. Like I said, this was a large ship, and so I'd fall for a long time, and then I would hit the water, and bam, I would wake up, and it was just like sweating and heart beating, and this is when I was like 8, 9, 10 years old, just dozens of times, over and over this dream. And then thankfully, after a few years, that dream stopped. And then in my 30s, I started having another random dream. I would be pitching for the Mariners. And I'd be standing on the mound, just staring in, like a sold-out Safeco Field, the crowd's going crazy. And this dream was a lot more fun. It could have been a little bit cooler because in the dream, I was always a middle relief pitcher. Like not a closer, not a starter, just like a middle relief pitcher. And like every once in a while, I wish that just once in the dream, like I could have been in like an all-star or something, but just always a middle reliever. And it was the same every time. I'd be standing there, I'd throw a couple pitches, and then it'd be over. And I don't know if any of you are into like dream interpretation, but I'm sure you could probably like go crazy with that stuff, like see how weird I am. But these are the two recurring dreams that I've kind of had over and over in my life. And this morning, to get into this message, we're going to look at sort of a recurring dream that a couple of the disciples had. And this was more of like a daydream, okay? It was like a vision that they just kept coming back to over and over. Jesus has been talking about his kingdom, and he's been healing people and feeding thousands, and he's walked on water, and he has calmed storms, and he has brought people back from the dead, okay? And the crowds are forming, and Israel, the whole region is buzzing, and they're just like, this is it, okay? This is the Messiah, this is the Christ, he's the one. And like the rest of Israel, the disciples, they're watching what's going on, and they start having visions of Jesus like gathering an army and defeating the Roman Empire, of Israel regaining like superpower status like it had during the days of Solomon. Israel becoming the greatest kingdom to ever rule on earth. And the disciples, despite how often Jesus talked of his impending death, could not seem to let go of the idea of Jesus becoming the most powerful earthly king in history. And it's interesting because that's not all that they dreamed about, apparently. Because even cooler were their visions of what it would be like to be in the inner circle of the most powerful man in the world. And they would dream about it, and they would talk about it, and they would debate about it all the time. And all of this leads to a very famous scene. Two of the disciples, led by their mom, they go to Jesus to try to secure their future position. Okay, so the three of them, led by their mom, they go to Jesus, and mom says, hey, Jesus, I have a little request. Please grant that when you are king and on your throne, okay, my two sons will sit on your right and on your left. Okay, when the kingdom comes, Jesus, when this kingdom comes, would you make my two boys the most powerful men in all of the kingdom? And Jesus is like, guys, you have no idea what you're asking for. Like, can you drink the cup that I'm going to drink? And they look at each other like, yep. You betcha. Sure we can. And Jesus is like, okay, yeah, you will. But you have no idea what that even means yet. You have no idea what the kingdom is or the way this is all going to go down. You have no idea what you're asking. And to sit at my right and my left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they've been prepared by my Father. And so, no, okay, I absolutely will not, cannot promise you that. Now, this is like a bold request. I mean, you think of like bold requests. This is bold. And I'll give him that. But then, like, to go in there led by your mom, it's not really a sign that you're ready to rule a kingdom. And so here's what happened from there. It says, when the 10 heard about this, they were indignant with the two brothers. And you got to imagine Peter, like, really? Peter's just like you're going to go behind my back and make like under the table deals with Jesus? Like, really? And so it's the picture is like this little, like, almost brawl is breaking out among the disciples. And it says, verse 25, Jesus called them together and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. He says, not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. This morning, we're wrapping up this series that we've been in for the past 5 weeks on the 5 love languages. And so over these weeks, we've looked at words of affirmation, quality time, the giving of gifts, physical touch. And this morning, we're going to close this out by thinking about love expressed through acts of service. And like all the expressions, the master of this love language was Jesus. You think about his life. His life was ultimately one great act of service. Like leaving heaven to take on flesh and becoming a peasant and then a carpenter and then a rabbi and just living with nothing. To be misunderstood and criticized and persecuted. And all of this was leading to the ultimate act of sacrifice, where God himself in Jesus became the sacrificial lamb. He was slain and offered up for the sins of the world. The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. And when we look at what Jesus did for us and we think about that act, and we get real serious and real clear about it, we see how unbelievably loved we are. The ultimate expression of God's love for us was his sacrifice. And the kingdom came in a way that no one expected. And greatness in the kingdom of God looks very different, we come to find out, than greatness in the kingdom of earth. And so Jesus says, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. Jesus loved us, so Jesus served us. In Jesus, the greatest became the least. And now, Jesus is inviting us to follow him, to drink from his cup. Now, here's the challenge with this particular love language. It is so easy for me, as a pastor or as a Christian, to study about servanthood and to read about serving and to teach about serving and to admire serving and to champion serving. Like, I can go to church and be deeply moved by what Jesus said about serving. And so I'm just like, yeah, I am pro-serving. But then, like, I come home and I realize, like, I'm for serving in every way except when it actually comes to serving. And I think that this was the hardest love language for Jesus to teach. This was the love language that, if you read through the Gospels, he just kept coming back to it over and over and over. Why? Because it's not easy to do. I mean, this is so unnatural for us. For me to actually become a servant requires a rewiring of my most core value. Putting myself first. Me. Now, one of the most emotional scenes to me when it comes to Jesus is where Jesus is standing before Pilate. And Pilate is questioning Jesus, and he's looking for reasons. He's actually looking for reasons to let him go. He's wanting Jesus to stand up for himself, to defend himself. He's expecting Jesus to be desperate and to plead for his life. I mean, Pilate, if you think about who he is, he's had many people stand before him with their lives on the line. But Jesus is now before him, and it's totally different. He isn't begging for mercy. He isn't trying to argue his case. He isn't pleading his innocence. He's calm, he's rational, and he almost seems to not care. Like Pilate's never met anyone like this. He is baffled by Jesus. And in the middle of this exchange, Jesus makes a simple statement, something that Jesus understands deeply and Pilate doesn't. And it explains completely why Jesus is calm and Pilate is the one in this situation that's about to have an emotional breakdown. Two men are in a room. One is a great man and one is far from it. And the difference is an idea that one gets and the other one doesn't. And an idea that's the cornerstone, really, of how and why we learn to serve. And so let me set this up a little bit. Pilate, for those of you that don't know much about him, Pilate had been appointed governor of Judea and Samaria. And so it isn't like he was elected by the people. He was not a man of the people. He was appointed by the Roman emperor, Tiberius. And Pilate's responsibility as governor was twofold. Okay, keep the peace and raise taxes. So Tiberius put him there to keep the people subdued, to make sure there was no insurrection, no uprising, and to squeeze as much money as possible out of the people of Israel for Rome. Now, Pilate was extremely unpopular with the religious leaders in Israel. Okay, he was not their friend. In fact, on at least 5 different occasions, Pilate was so worried about some uprising that he had heard about that he sent his soldiers into the Jewish quarters of Jerusalem and just massacred Jewish leaders and Jewish people. Okay, so the leaders of Israel, they despised Pilate. And yet what's interesting is, on this particular occasion, and this is what contributes to the whole drama of this scene, on this occasion, the Jewish leaders need a favor from Pilate. And so after several trials based on like trumped up accusations, they bring Jesus to Pilate. And Pilate has a conversation with Jesus. And initially, Pilate comes away thinking, okay, I see no good reason to have this man executed. Like, looking at those, he's like, whatever your guys' problem is, it isn't my problem. And so whatever you need to do, you just go take care of it. But the religious leaders, like, they're not accepting that. They say, no, we insist. He has to die. And since we don't have the authority, we need you to order his execution. And so they demand it. And it looks like a riot is about to break out in Jerusalem. And the last thing that Pilate needs for his political career is to have a report go back to Rome, okay, back to Emperor Tiberius, that he can't keep the peace in Jerusalem, that he can't handle his post. So Pilate has an idea. He orders that Jesus be flogged, okay, so severely whipped. To be flogged was basically to take a person to the brink of death and yet not actually kill them. That was the goal. It was brutal, and it sent a powerful message. Many people never recovered. Like, it often ended up being a death sentence. Like, people wouldn't die right away, but very often they would die slowly from things like infection or other types of medical complications. So Pilate has Jesus flogged, and then afterwards, he brings Jesus out to stand before the crowd and the religious leaders. And Pilate's thinking to himself, okay, this is going to work. Because, okay, like, I haven't killed him like you want, but like, I've almost killed him. And so surely they will look at this man who has been beaten to a bloody pulp and go, oh, ew. Like, enough is enough. That's enough blood. That's enough gore. Whatever he did wrong, okay, he has been punished enough. We are more than satisfied. But it doesn't go that way at all. The religious leaders aren't satisfied. They don't want Jesus severely punished. They don't want Jesus badly wounded. They want Jesus dead. And they will not be satisfied until Jesus is dead. And suddenly, Pilate is seized with fear because he realizes, whoa, like, there's a whole lot more to this than I thought. Like, I'm on the brink of something much bigger here than I realized. I don't know exactly what's going on here, but this is serious business. one wrong move here, and there is going to be a massive uprising. There's going to be an insurgence like we've never seen. And Pilate's heard how the masses have been following Jesus, how he's risen in renown to become the focus of the nation. There are rumors of miracles and rumors of magical powers, and words like Messiah and Christ are now being attached to him. So there's this pressure in his face right here from the religious leaders to kill Jesus, but he knows that in the towns, in the villages, in the countrysides, the people of Israel love Jesus. Jesus is insanely popular. And so Pilate is caught in the middle, and the tension of this is just crushing him. So Pilate brings Jesus back inside the palace, and they have a second conversation. And within the context of this conversation, Jesus makes a statement that is so true and so relevant that if we get this, it changes the way we see ourselves. And it changes the way we see our circumstances. Pilate brings Jesus into the palace, and here's how the conversation goes. It says, when Pilate heard this, them demanding crucifixion, he was even more afraid. And he hears as well that Jesus has been called the Son of God. When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid, and he went back inside the palace. Where do you come from? He asked Jesus. But Jesus gave him no answer. Do you refuse to speak to me? Pilate said. Do you refuse to speak to me? Don't you realize that I have power either to free you or to crucify you? And Jesus answered, you would have no power over me if it were not given you from above. In other words, Pilate, you're not the center of power. You may be caught up in the drama of this moment, but I'm not. The only power you have is power that's been given to you, which means, Pilate, it can be taken away from you. And Jesus makes an incredibly important point about the nature of power here. Power is given to us, and it's temporary. And one day, we will all be accountable for how we used it. All power and influence is temporary. It comes and it goes. All power and authority is ultimately given to us by God, all of it. Jesus is saying to Pilate, you think Tiberius appointed you, and that's how? He's like, no. God has given this to you. But it's always temporary, and we will always lose it in the end. And so what we do with it when we have it in that short season is the only thing that matters. Now, if we were to go around this room and ask, okay, are you a powerful person? Do you think of yourself, are you a powerful person? I think most people would say oh, no. Not me. I've heard of powerful people, but, not me. No way. But I think that most of us are far more powerful than we realize. We all have these arenas where we hold power. We all do. And so what might some of those, let's just brainstorm this. What might some of those arenas be for you? Well, there's power, within families. There's always power within families. There's birth order power. And this is huge. Isn't it true that if you have a younger sibling, you have some power over them? Annie's flexing her eyebrows. She's oh. If you're 17 and your brother is 12, you have power. If you're 11 and your sister is 8, you have power. And then there's marital power. Every husband has some degree of power over his wife, and every wife has some degree of power over her husband. Because what you do will really affect their life, right? You can make life awesome, or you can make life hell. You can build them up, or you can tear them down. You parents, you hold all kinds of power over your kids. Think about it. You can say yes, and you can say no. You can dictate so much about their lives. You can build their spirits. You can damage their spirits. You can ignore them. You can spoil them. You can build their character. you have power. It's real. There's organizational power. Now, maybe some of you here, you're like a board member of something, or a business owner, or you have some like lofty title of some kind. So Brooklyn, our 8-year-old, her school participates in this thing called the National Hoop Shoot. So it's like this free throw shooting contest put on by the Elks Lodge. And so she represented her elementary school at the city in this event. And at the end, she got this award, like a trophy and then this certificate. And I was in awe of the certificate because the certificate was signed by, get this, the exalted ruler of the Elks Lodge. Is that not like the sweetest title? The exalted ruler. So I started wondering to myself, like, what do you have to do to get that title? And it made me feel a little bit like, Pastor Jason, that's kind of weak sauce. So, okay, my new goal, just so you all know, is to become the exalted ruler of Brookview. Okay, like organizations, there's power, there's titles. And some of you, maybe you have a title, and that's cool. Maybe one of you guys is the exalted ruler. So that would be cool. Okay, then there's positional power, where you're given a position and it comes with authority. Maybe you're a coach, or you're a teacher, or you're a manager. You know, maybe you hand out grades, or you give people evaluations. And I don't know, but maybe some of you have some positional power. There's social power. And this is what I'll just call like the power of cool. I mean, people care what you think because to them, you're just like cool. And this one, really, when you think about it, this one carries so much weight that it's almost scary. Some of you know that I grew up kind of rough in some ways, not a church family. And many of you don't know that I actually started chewing tobacco when I was 8 years old. And now, that like blows my mind when I think about it because like that's Brooklyn's age. So I'm just like, wow. And so one day, I got my hands on a pouch of Red Man, which was just the best. Because if you put a big wad in there and you chewed it around for a while, like you could get the coolest, deepest, darkest brown spit. And so I was out in my front yard, and I had my Red Man, and I grabbed a hammer and started working on my treehouse. And I was kind of in my own little world, just like a man among men. And my stepdad came out, and he was walking like by me in the yard, and I saw him, and I was like, and he was like, "Hi," and I was totally caught. It like didn't occur to me that he might be around. Just totally caught off guard, and so I was just like, just waved and turned away. And he says to me, "Are you trying to avoid me, Jason?" And he immediately started walking directly toward me, like eyes fixed. And so I totally panicked. Like this would have been big trouble. And so I just like. And I just like swallowed that sucker. And it felt like fire going down. And immediately, I just started sweating and like my heart rate just skyrocketed. And I felt like all dizzy, felt like I was going to pass out. And right at that moment, my mom came out of the house and called us in to say, "Hey, dinner's ready." So my stepdad and I, we went in and we sat down at the table, and I just sat there like, looking at my plate like, oh. Everything was spinning, and it was just like this out-of-body experience. I couldn't eat. So I'm just like picking at my food, and then my mom like exploded on me because she made pigs in a blanket, which was my favorite thing. Okay, well, that is breakfast sausages wrapped in pancakes. But like, I couldn't touch it. I was like this super picky eater. And so the fact that I wasn't eating even this, like just sent her off. She's like, "I made your favorite thing for you. Okay, me and your stepdad, we don't even like this, but we are sacrificing for you. So you will not sit there and pick at your food. You will eat it. You will eat it. And so I'm like, oh. So I like took a bite. I took, and then the greasy sausage and the red man. It was just like not a good. So I immediately just took off and ran for the bathroom. And I buried my head in the toilet. And it was like my head exploded. Like there was just red man and sausage, like everywhere. And so my mom's watching this whole thing. And she's standing in the doorway like, the pig's in the blanket. Like, oh my gosh, sweetie, I had no idea you were sick. I feel awful. Okay, you don't need to eat the rest of your pigs in the blanket. And I was like, yeah. I told her about that years later, and she didn't even remember it. So, okay, but here's the question. What in the world was I doing chewing Red Man as an 8-year-old? How did that happen? And really, this was all about someone who had this amazing social power in my life. My best friend in the neighborhood was an older kid, a couple years older than me, named Vince. And he had cousins that were a couple years older than him that he looked up to. And so they got him chewing. And then since Vince chewed and he was cool, I chewed. And this is social power. It is the power of cool. Now Vince probably had no idea like how influential he really was in my life. But I'll tell you something. 8-year-olds don't chew because it tastes good. Social power is this amazing thing. And we all carry it around. And often we have no idea. And my guess is that many of you have people watching you. Like they're watching. And what you value affects what they value. And what you do affects what they do. And this is the power that you have. And it's not title or position, but your influence to them is compelling. And it can be used for good or not. And guys, I think that we, like most of us, really underestimate how much power we have, how much what we do affects other people. We have these arenas where we operate with influence, and that power gets leveraged, either to build up or to tear down. And here's the important thing. Your power has been given to you by God. And he's given it to you for a reason, for a purpose. And one day, your power will be gone. And you will be accountable for how you used it. And Jesus simply says, if you want to be great, learn how to serve. Now, the scene with Jesus and Pilate is so ironic. Because Pilate says to Jesus, do you realize how much power I have over you? That's ironic. And Jesus looks at Pilate through blood-stained tears. And he says, Pilate, relax. You don't have any power over me. Not real power. Like you have borrowed power. Pilate, you've spent your life leveraging your power just to gain more power. But Pilate, you don't really own any power. It's on loan to you, and someday it's all going away. But Pilate ends up caving to the pressure that's right in his face, and he orders, even though he kind of tries to distance himself from it, he orders that Jesus be crucified. And you think about like, well, whatever happened to Pilate? Well, we know this from historical sources, okay? Not from the Bible, but from other reliable historical sources. 2 years after he crucifies Jesus, Pilate hears rumors of an insurgence in Samaria. So he sends his army into Samaria and he massacres people. The Samaritans appeal to Rome and Tiberius, the emperor, the guy who Pilate was so intent on pleasing and impressing, who Pilate was doing everything he could to try to continue to be empowered by. And Tiberius hears what's gone on, and he sends some people to Jerusalem, and they depose Pilate. He's removed from power, and he's sent back to Rome to face trial. And on his way to Rome, check this out, Emperor Tiberius, the most powerful man in the world, dies. And he loses all of his power. So when Pilate shows up in Rome, they don't know what to do with him. Okay, so they exile him to a place called Gaul, which is in like part of modern day France. And in Gaul, Pilate the Powerful took his own life. And he's just wiped from the pages of history. And the only reason people know his name is because he's a small part of the story of Jesus. Like the humble carpenter from Nazareth. And you just think about how crazy that turn of events is. And here's the point. God has this way of honoring the humble, of exalting those that serve. If you want to be great, Jesus says, learn to serve. One of the earliest Christian creeds is found in Philippians. Paul is writing to his friends in Philippi, and he's pleading with them to serve one another in love. And then he quotes what many Bible scholars believe to be one of the earliest Christian creeds. Now, this is not original to Paul. This was apparently already out there. It was probably being recited in a number of churches, and it was probably already familiar to the Philippians. But to make his point about serving and loving people, Paul quotes this creed, and it goes like this. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus. And here's the creed. Who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name. That at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue acknowledge that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. God has this way of exalting the humble and humbling the exalted. And what we do with our power, our influence, it really, really matters. Now, here's the danger with like a message like this. We can think, that's right. That is right. That's really true. And so I'm going to be a servant. I'm going to do great things by serving lots and lots of people. I'm going to go out and serve the masses. And that's great. That's great. But the most important people aren't the masses that are out there. They're the people that are closest to us. The ones that we're like really comfortable with, like our roommates and our parents and our siblings and our spouse. Mother Teresa, who knew about serving the masses. Okay, if anyone knew about serving the masses, it was Mother Teresa. And she said one time, never worry about numbers. Help one person at a time, and always start with the person nearest to you. Serving those closest to us in small and humble ways, guys, it's just not that sexy. I mean, it's just not glamorous. It doesn't get headlines. People don't generally get awards for it. But it is truly the foundation of a great life. And so I just want to ask you to think, like, who are those that are closest to you? Who are the people in your life that are the most familiar? The people that they're the ones that get the real you. Like if you're grumpy, they're safe enough to like take it out on. How are you doing at finding simple ways to just serve them? Like modest, regular ways that communicate to them, hey, I love you. In the book, The 5 Love Languages, Gary Chapman, he talks about this. He tells the story of a young married couple, Dave and Mary. They live in like this mill town. They're kind of blue-collar people. And they come to him complaining. He's the pastor of the church in this little town. They come to him complaining that they disagree about everything. That they're not connecting, that their marriage is getting cold. And so he asks like some probing questions about the source of the problems. Like, what is it that's so frustrating? And so she's mad because he doesn't help around the house. And he goes hunting every Saturday. And he just kind of ignores her. And he's mad because she's like always complaining. And when he gets home at night, like from work at the mill, the house is a wreck and the baby's a mess and there's toys everywhere and dinner isn't usually even on on her radar. And so Gary Chapman writes, he says, thinking I'd better start looking for solutions rather than praying for more problems, I looked at Dave and asked, Dave, when you were dating before you were married, did you go hunting or fishing every Saturday? Pretty much. But I always got home in time to see her on Saturday night. Most of the time, I'd get home in time to wash my truck before I went to see her. I didn't like to see her with a dirty truck. As we continued talking, I learned that Mary had gotten married right out of high school and that during her senior year, Dave came by almost every night and stayed for supper. He would help me do my chores around the house, and then we'd sit and talk until supper time. Dave, what did the two of you do after supper? I asked. He looked at me with a sheepish smile and said, well, the regular dating stuff. You know. But if I had a school project, Mary said, he'd help me with it. Sometimes we worked hours on school projects. I was in charge of the Christmas float for the senior class. He helped me for 3 weeks every afternoon. He was great. I thought I was beginning to see some light, but I wasn't sure if they were seeing it. I asked Mary, when you were dating Dave, what convinced you that he really loved you? What made him different from other guys you had dated? It was the way he helped me with everything, she said. None of the other guys cared about all that. He even helped me wash dishes when he had supper at our house. He was the most incredible person I had ever met, but after we got married, that changed. And if we're not really careful, this is what happens, right? And not just in marriage, okay? I'm not husband bashing here. This doesn't just happen in marriage. It happens in any relationship where we get comfortable with other people. And so I just want to ask you, who are the people that are closest to you? And in what ways are you currently serving them? In what ways are your actions communicating, you matter to me, you're loved by me? Is there something simple that you could be doing? Sometimes when life gets just really busy for us, which is a lot, especially for Jen, when she just gets really busy, I've noticed that her love language shifts a little bit. A word or a gift or a touch, it doesn't really do it. What fills her love tank is when I serve her. When I vacuum or scrub the toilets. That's what makes her feel loved. And it isn't just for her that tasks are getting done. It's what gets communicated by my doing them. It's I'm with you in this. You're not alone. I care about you. In fact, one time she even said, Jason, when I see you vacuuming and cleaning toilets, it makes me feel cared for by you. In fact, when I hear the vacuum or a scrubbing sound coming from the bathroom, it makes me feel close to you, kind of romantic. It actually makes me feel desire for you. And I was like, really? So, is it bad for the carpets to get vacuumed 5 times a day? Or so I just want to say, it's no problem. Just want to say, guys, if you drop by our house unannounced and you see me vacuuming, don't knock, just go away. No, actually, okay, the reason that this stuff is so powerful, when I do it, is mostly because I don't do it. I don't do it anywhere often as much as I should. And so when I stop and I think, what could I do to communicate love to Jen? And I go, well, maybe a new car or a trip to Cabo is kind of off the table. But you know what would be amazing is if I started helping around the house in sort of unexpected ways. And that turns out to actually be a really big deal. And so my question for you today is not what are you going to do to go change the world and serve the masses? But who are the people closest to you? Like the easiest ones for you to neglect. And in what ways can you communicate love to them just by serving them? I mean, what could you do that would speak love to them? You have power to influence them, to impact their lives, but it's not going to be there forever. This is your window. You use it or you lose it. In a moment when his closest guys were fighting over which one was going to be the greatest, Jesus called them together and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many.